Our club takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Colleen Kennedy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club Toronto. Competition is what drives businesses to develop innovative products, increase the quality of their offerings, and improve affordability for all consumers. Today, we are lucky to be joined by Canada's Competition Commissioner, Matthew Boswell, who will discuss the need for a strong focus on competition and how that can play a strategic role in Canada's post-pandemic economic recovery. It's an important conversation for Canada, and we are thrilled that the Commissioner has chosen our stage to deliver it. Just before we dive into today's topic, here's some information about how to participate with us. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. And once you click the questions tab, you can enter your questions and we'll get them to the moderator. So please make sure you send what you're thinking about. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit, and we have been gathering people together for over 124 years now. It is because of our sponsors that we can continue to do that. We are grateful for today's event sponsor, Waste Connections of Canada, for their support of today's important discussion. And now to introduce today's speaker. Matthew Boswell was appointed Canada's Commissioner of Competition in March of 2019 for a 5-year term, having previously served in other roles at the Bureau since 2011. Prior to joining the Competition Bureau, Mr. Boswell worked for the Ontario Securities Commission and served as Assistant Crown Attorney in Toronto. After his remarks, the Commissioner will be joined in conversation by Christine Dobby, reporter for the Globe and Mail. We're so glad that she could join us for a great conversation as well. But one of the club's traditions that has not changed, whether we're live or virtual, is the toast we make to our country. Usually done in person with the raising of a glass, today we could make a nod or raise a glass towards the screen and toast Canada. To Canada.
Canada.
Commissioner, Matthew, I'll now turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thank you, Colleen. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the Canadian Club for inviting me to speak with you today. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss the role of competition in Canada and why it matters more than ever as we work to recover from the economic consequences of the ongoing pandemic and aim to build a stronger, more resilient Canadian economy. Let me start by briefly outlining why competition is so important in our economy. It is the force that drives us to do better. It rewards innovation and penalizes complacency. And it drives businesses to develop newer, better, and more affordable products. There is no motivator quite like competition. And often we are inspired to realize our full potential only when others push us to reach it. Study after study has shown the power of competition to drive productivity and performance in the marketplace. Competition boosts investment in new technologies, allowing businesses to displace entrenched incumbents or even create entirely new markets. Competition not only lights a fire under business, but under the economy as a whole. As firms learn to compete in their own backyard, they are better prepared for the global challengers that await them outside our borders. Canada is and will always be a key participant in the global economy, and we must focus on what drives our competitiveness abroad. Ultimately, all Canadians benefit when competition makes our economy more productive and resilient. Individuals and firms alike enjoy lower prices, more choice, and better quality products and services when there is healthy competition. So we know that competition fuels innovation and growth. And so in the midst of the current global pandemic, we must ask ourselves the question, how does competition fit into Canada's economic recovery? I would start with the importance of staying the course on Canada's commitment to its competition laws. In times of economic crisis, it is tempting for some to lobby that the long-established principles for healthy competition be relaxed and claim that doing so will ease stressors to Canada's markets and aid in economic recovery. However, history has shown us that the opposite is true. By shielding themselves from the motivating force of competition, entrenched firms can raise prices, reduce quality, and become complacent. The upshot is that this conduct and the policies that might allow it can worsen an existing economic crisis and delay the recovery. To defend against this, in the words of James Ilsley, a member of Parliament during the Great Depression, competition is the best protection the public has. Unfortunately, crises can also be prime opportunities for firms to consolidate market power and engage in anti-competitive activity, whether through the acquisition of weakened competitors or cartel conduct to control the price and supply of goods and services. To protect competition, both through and beyond the current crisis, we must turn our attention to the core of Canada's economy, small and medium-sized businesses. Businesses with fewer than 100 employees account for over 40% of Canada's private sector employment. And over 99% of firms in Canada have under 250 employees. These firms are the engine that drive competition in much of Canada's economy. Through their entry and expansion, they challenge established incumbents and disrupt entire industries. They are the true bedrock of the Canadian economy. Sadly, it is these small and medium-sized businesses that have been hardest hit by the current crisis. Analysis by the Royal Bank of Canada shows that this year, smaller firms have recorded almost twice as many job losses as their larger counterparts, with women and youth suffering disproportionately. If Canada's small and medium-sized businesses are hollowed out, we lose out on vital economic activity today and a more dynamic economy tomorrow. It is an unfortunate reality, but we will see more businesses exiting the market in the coming months, which will increase industry concentration in Canada. Canada's competition laws will help protect the investments made by governments to support our economy by preserving the competitive intensity of marketplaces across the country. While governments provide financial assistance to help vulnerable firms to weather the crisis and continue to compete, Canada's competition laws ensure that firms can't use this crisis to insulate themselves from competition. The Bureau will remain vigilant against such attempts. Taken together, stimulus and a commitment to competition can be a powerful combination for seeing Canada through this volatile period. In the midst of such volatility, it is understandable that Canadians are focused primarily on the day-to-day, making ends meet and ensuring that their families are healthy and secure in the coming months. But we should also not lose sight of what Canada can be after COVID-19. The decisions we make today will position us well for a stronger economy and a more prosperous future. I believe that the key to that future is in taking action in 3 vital areas. First, safeguarding competition in an era of global digital giants is paramount. Network effects and economies of scope and scale have created an environment where digital markets can tip toward high levels of concentration and give firms unprecedented economic power. In the absence of scrutiny and principled enforcement from competition authorities to address abuses of market power, these companies can take on the role of anti-competitive gatekeepers, deciding who gets to compete and potentially forcing new and innovative firms out of the market. It is the responsibility of the Competition Bureau to enforce Canada's competition law and ensure these players compete fairly on the merits of their offerings. We must preserve a path forward for new entrants so they can scale up and challenge even those firms who we may have called disruptors themselves in their infancy. My foremost priority as Commissioner of Competition is to ensure that the Bureau has the tools and resources it needs to safeguard competition in the digital age. Second, a strong telecommunications infrastructure underpinned by vigorous competition is foundational to Canada's future success in a digital world. Investment in internet infrastructure is critical in Canada, and the pandemic has only increased the urgency. Firms of all sizes have had to rapidly shift their business models to support online offerings. And to do that, they need reliable, affordable access to Canada's networks. As we know, the federal government has made recent announcements about the Universal Broadband Fund as part of its efforts in this area. Competition in this sector is essential, and the Bureau will continue to be vigilant against anti-competitive conduct and advocate for increased competition in Canada's telecommunications markets. Finally, creating regulatory environments that, at all levels of government, prioritize competition in Canada's economic affairs will help improve our productivity and our overall economic well-being without compromising legitimate regulatory goals. We have a tremendous opportunity right now to rethink the rules of Canada's economy with a focus on removing unnecessary barriers to competition that can discourage new entrants and impede their ability to scale up. An important factor as we rebound from this crisis will be the ability of businesses to enter or re-enter markets post-pandemic, something that the regulatory environment can either encourage or frustrate. Research by the OECD puts Canada in second last place among our OECD peers for market regulation, a measure of how pro-competitive a country's regulations are. The elimination of regulatory barriers to competition at all levels of government is a huge opportunity for Canada. For example, a 2018 study estimated that Canada could realize up to a 5% boost in productivity were it to pursue regulatory reform that places greater emphasis on competition in the Canadian economy. Just like a firm facing increasing competition, I believe we have yet to explore our full competitive potential as a country, but we are working hard to change that. We recently published a toolkit to help us strengthen our economy by adopting more pro-competitive policies. This publication is available on the Bureau's website, and I encourage everyone to take a look at this document. We must all think about these important issues together, and I ask you to consider how the principles of competition can be incorporated in areas that your work touches upon. And of course, our team here at the Bureau is ready to assist regulators and policymakers who would like to assess the competition impact of existing or proposed regulations. As we head into what will be a difficult winter, I want to end on a positive note. Although incredibly challenging in many ways, the past year has shown us what Canadians are capable of in times of crisis. We have faced this crisis not as individuals, but together. And there is tremendous strength and resolve across our great nation to weather this storm and come out stronger on the other side. The economic success of our nation is ultimately a shared responsibility. Canada has the potential to reap the real benefits of a strong culture of competition, but it requires all of us to engage. The Bureau's role is to ensure that those with economic power in Canada don't abuse that power, and that firms of all sizes can compete freely and fairly. We will also continue to promote and advocate for regulatory environments that prioritize competition. All levels of government need to find the delicate balance between regulation and competition. Businesses of all sizes need to compete hard on the merits to drive themselves forward, to innovate, to grow, and to avoid stagnating to everyone's detriment. Consumers need to continue to vote with their wallets and voice their desire for increased competition throughout the country. In times of crisis and in the economic recovery we anticipate, we know that making good on our shared responsibility is more important than ever. Thank you again for inviting me to speak with you today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and it's wonderful to have the chance to speak with you, Commissioner.
Hi.
I wanted to pick up on your argument that we have an opportunity to come out of this crisis stronger. So it's coming up on 2 years since you started your 5-year term as Commissioner. And I know you've spoken about this issue in the past about regulatory barriers to competition and how those are really holding back productivity and innovation in Canada. When you look at that landscape in Canada, particularly at this time amidst the COVID crisis, what do you see as potential areas where regulation or barriers could be rethought and we could actually see more competition?
Well, I think, thanks, Christine, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I think that the whole spectrum of regulations and policies in Canada are ripe for reconsideration, are ripe for analysis by governments at all levels, as I say, from municipal, provincial, federal, territorial governments. There are opportunities throughout. As I referenced in the speech, there's an OECD Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development indicator called the Product Market Regulation Indicator that's done every 10 years. And this effectively looks at various sectors in the economy and then horizontal regulations throughout the economy at different levels, and sort of ranks member states based on those indicators. And Canada in 2018 was ranked 33rd out of 34 countries for product market regulation. So that suggests that throughout the economy, there are tremendous opportunities to allow competition to flourish. I should say that if you look back in time, which is one of the benefits of every 10 years these studies being conducted, 1998, Canada was 10th out of OECD members. By 2008, we had dropped, I think, to 18th out of 34 countries, and now we dropped to 33rd out of 34 countries. So I wouldn't point to one specific area, although the Bureau has advocated for pro-competitive policies in many areas across the country. We've recently advocated in Ontario and British Columbia for more pro-competitive liquor control policies. We've advocated to municipal governments about things as small, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but as the regulation of food trucks and how those regulations can impact competition at that level. We've advocated for ride-sharing services in different municipalities, and we've of course advocate at the federal level frequently to, for example, the CRTC on competition issues in telecom.
Great. So you mentioned the Bureau has this toolkit that you prepared for policymakers when they're considering, basically to urge them to consider competition in making decisions. What kind of response are you getting to that? Is this message getting through, do you think?
So it's relatively early days. We put the toolkit out in the summer, and we sent it to over 4,000 government policy makers and regulators across the country. From our ongoing work over the last decades, we have great contacts with regulators. And we've seen pickup on the toolkit. We've had requests to do trial runs using the toolkit with the advice of Bureau specialists. So we're very hopeful that it will get a significant pickup, especially as we go into an economic recovery. In certain sectors, people are focused obviously on the pandemic right now. But as we move forward and start to work our way back to a more normal world, if we can call it that, we're really optimistic that this will be taken up across the country. And we're here ready to help, obviously to the extent our resources allow. But this is something we very much believe in at the Bureau.
Yeah, as you say, there's so much focus obviously on dealing with the immediate effects of the pandemic, but I guess there's an argument to be made, as you say, that this is, considering the effects of competition, is more urgent than ever. And there's really an opportunity there, as you say. You also talked about safeguarding competition in the era of the digital giants. We've seen a lot of international activity recently when it comes to regulating big tech. Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon. Here in Canada, the Bureau said in the summer that it's investigating Amazon for potential abuse of dominance. You've also, in the past, the Bureau has investigated Apple and Google and Facebook, I believe. What role do you see Canada playing in the international landscape of scrutiny of big tech?
Well, so you're right that this is receiving tremendous attention around the world from our counterpart competition authorities globally. As I say, it's receiving tremendous attention from politicians around the world. For example, the United States Congress's House Subcommittee on Antitrust, which is a different word for competition, just released a significant report, some 500 pages, looking into the digital economy and big tech, and put out many bipartisan recommendations that stronger enforcement was required, that the resources for the U.S. federal agencies, the two federal agencies, the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division and the Federal Trade Commission, needed significantly more resources to tackle the complex issues of enforcing competition in the digital economy. The European Union has been at the forefront of these issues for several years. My counterpart, the European Commissioner for Competition, Margaret Vestager, has been taking on multiple investigations. So that's the global context. So the question is, what's the role of Canada? Well, my job, the Bureau's job, is to protect competition in this country, to have, if remedies are necessary against big tech firms, for example, or others operating in the digital economy, we need remedies that are enforceable in Canada. It's not a question of us sitting back and saying, oh, we're just gonna, we're gonna rely on our big neighbor to the south or the European Union to fix all the problems. That's just not acceptable, and not a choice, not a path that we've taken in the past. As you point out, in the past several years, We've brought cases against Facebook. That was related to false or misleading privacy representations. Other countries have brought cases as well, but we brought it to protect Canadians from those types of false or misleading representations. We've brought a case against Amazon 3-4 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, but with respect to pricing practices on their platform. We investigated Google in 2016, a comprehensive investigation into Google with respect to some of the terms and conditions in their contracts and issues of excluding rivals. So we're hard at work. It's incredibly complex and demands significant resources to do it. So we need to stay on the job. We need to make sure that we have the tools so that we're able to do it effectively.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the tools that Canada does have on this front. The maximum administrative fine for abuse of dominance is $10 million. And we did see in the Facebook settlement that you referenced in connection with the Cambridge Analytica scandal that they agreed to pay a $9 million fine. In contrast, the company paid a $5 billion fine in the US on that issue. And another thing is when you look at something like market studies, that's something that the UK used in connection with its open banking initiative. The Bureau can conduct market studies, but doesn't have the power to compel the production of information in that context, right? So does the Bureau have the tools that it needs to take on big tech and to deal with the digital economy?
I think that, if you look at the tools that our counterparts have, very important tools, particularly in the digital economy, such as the market study power and the power to obtain the evidence that we need to properly examine something, an evidence-based examination of a particular market in the country, with a view to potentially making recommendations on how that market, if it's not working properly, how it could be fixed. So virtually all of our sort of counterparts around the world have the market study power with the ability to compel information. The European Union's we're moving towards even more powerful market study power. So that is significant from our perspective, and something that we at the Bureau have talked about publicly before. In 2019, Minister Baines, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, whose department the Bureau falls within, wrote a letter to me calling on me to work with his team in the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development to examine all aspects of our law to see if they're fit for purpose for the digital age. Now, we are working with them, his team at ISED, and hope to see that there will be developments in this front in the future. I think you also pointed out the issue with respect to sanctions, potential sanctions in Canada. And I think that's clearly an issue that was underscored or highlighted by the Facebook resolution. Now, to be fair, the FTC settlement with Facebook was broader than the Bureau case, because the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, has enforcement powers over privacy specifically, so more like the Office of the Privacy Commissioner in Canada, but also over false or misleading consumer representations. So it was broader. They had eight things, but they did obtain a $5 billion fine. And our max administrative monetary penalty, financial penalty for the conduct we were looking at, is $10 million. And we reached a resolution for a $9 million penalty, and Facebook also paid $500,000 for our investigative costs.
Right, so a good outcome considering what the framework that you had to work within.
Certainly, and some people might criticize and say, well, why didn't you go for 10 million? Well, if, given our resources, we also have to be pragmatic, and we have to acknowledge when companies do the right thing, for lack of a better term, and resolve the problematic conduct through a settlement with the Bureau. So yeah, I think in the bigger picture, it was a success from a Canadian perspective, taking into account the parameters. I can only administer and enforce the Competition Act as it's laid out by Parliament.
You've mentioned resources a couple of times. That was something that came up in the U.S. congressional report. And when you look at all of your priorities, you're looking at investigating Amazon and keeping up tabs, presumably, on the other large digital companies. You've said you're proactively monitoring the digital economy in Canada. Something else that you're looking at doing is keeping tabs on the potential for bid rigging or colluding on contract bidding, as we start to see stimulus spending on large infrastructure projects come along. The Bureau had a budget of about $54 million last year. Do you have enough resources to do this work?
So the reality, Christine, is that our budget that's provided by the government, a portion of our budget is based on fees we receive for merger review, but the remainder is received from the government, from the center of the government. And the reality is that budget has remained flat in real terms. It's actually declined in real terms. It's remained flat for 10 years. And the number of employees we have today is fewer than we had 20 years ago. So those are just the numbers. And then one has to consider the complexity of the investigations that we're undertaking now compared to 10, 20 years ago, and take into account as well the explosion in data in the world, in all aspects of life. But in our world, it means that we are often struggling to work through, review, forensically examine millions of pages of electronic records and other data. And in fact, the amount of data that we obtain every year has gone up something like 22 times in just the last 4 or 5 years. So we have the sort of the digital realities and of the amount of data. We have the digital realities of the complexity of examining these issues, like algorithms and those types of things, the opacity of digital markets, the need for different skill sets within the Bureau, for example, data scientists. So all those things are what we're struggling with every day. We're taking, the steps that we can take. We've put as our 4-year vision to be a world-leading competition agency in terms of all things we do in the digital economy. And that is also sort of focused internally on getting our staff the tools they need, the training they need to tackle these complex cases. And in that regard, we brought in a chief digital enforcement officer, George McDonald, who was with IBM before coming to the Bureau, who's doing great work inside the Bureau on getting new forensic investigative tools, encouraging a digital strategy, digital by design. But it's, we have a lot of work to do here to stay on top of this.
And just on that issue, the sort of the proactive monitoring that you've been doing, I know this is something that you talked about in terms of the digital economy. And I understand that the Bureau has essentially sort of had to reshuffle around some resources to make that happen. I wonder if you could talk about some of the steps that you take to actually proactively look for problems or potential enforcement issues.
Yeah. So proactive enforcement is a area of focus. It's a priority. It's something that I believe in to my very core. As you may have heard from the introduction, I have sort of an enforcement background throughout my life in different contexts. And I believe fundamentally that we need to unearth problems in the market as quickly as we can, and take steps to address those problems as quickly as we can. So we're doing things on many different fronts to get more proactive. Always, of course, with the caveat within our resource envelope. And as I say, there are reasons for this, particularly in the digital economy. They're fast-moving markets. If we're not fast, and by the time we figure something out, it's too late. The market's moved on, there's a new problem. So we need to get faster all the time and to be on top of these things. We need to use all the tools in our toolbox. That is why I've put, and our team here has agreed to a strategic vision that includes us using injunctions more frequently to stop what we see as harmful conduct while we finalize the investigation. And we've done that twice in the last 6 months in the deceptive marketing practices world, where we got an injunction against FlightHub and FlightHub.com and JustFly.com, and also against a company called NouveauCare for false and misleading healthcare claims. But so in terms of the proactive enforcement, in terms of mergers, we had a merger notification unit. We've expanded that to be, we now call it the Merger Intelligence and Notification Unit, to look for mergers that fall under our threshold for mandatory notification, to look for mergers that fall under that threshold that could be problematic, that could be resulting in a substantial lessening of competition in Canada. We've recently moved another resource from one part of the Bureau to that team to amp that up, especially as we think more mergers will fall under the notifiable threshold as a result of the pandemic and their annual revenues dropping. And interestingly, in terms of that, we recently received a grant from inside government, from the Center for Regulatory Innovation, for our Mergers Intelligence and Notification Unit, to develop an algorithm over the next 12 to 18 months, so that we can be scraping more data and detecting these potentially problematic transactions using that algorithm. So I'm encouraged by that. In terms of more proactive, we issued in September 2019, as you may know, we issued what we call our digital enforcement call out, where we had an issues paper explaining to the Canadian public, here are the issues in the digital economy, here are the issues that may result in markets tipping to, for example, one winner to control the whole market. And we explained how that might work, but then we also went on display to explain, well, and there might also be anti-competitive strategies and specific tactics used by digital companies to get the whole market, to exclude others, to prevent entry. So that was a proactive step we took. We're also working hard with one of our public procurement partners to develop digital screens for bid rigging. That is where you can input the data received on a call for bids or tenders from various parties, run that through an algorithm, and the algorithm will flag what is potentially problematic conduct. That's not to say that this algorithm will be like, yes, there was for sure bid rigging, but but it will help us, and it will help the public procurement community across Canada to analyze their procurement and see if there are things that maybe need a little bit more examination, lifting up some rocks and seeing what actually was going on. So that's very exciting proactive enforcement. We're also building an intelligence unit in our monopolistic practices. That's our enforcement group that looks at, for lack of a better term, for big companies behaving badly, to once again to detect problematic conduct earlier, to analyze our complaint data, just generally to be more on top of what's going on in the marketplace. So it is a huge focus. It's a huge focus of mine and of our team here, and we're already seeing it pay benefits. We've detected non-notifiable mergers that required a further look by the Bureau because of some of the competition issues at play, and we expect to continue doing that in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
That's interesting. Has it changed people's behavior at all? Have you had any parties sort of come forward proactively, knowing that you're taking a closer look at these things?
Well, what I can say on that front is that there's been a fair bit of commentary in the competition bar about it. They've taken notes.
Okay, so the lawyers are watching. So
I guess maybe they're watching right now.
Yeah. I have a few questions for you from the audience here. You've highlighted the challenges of dealing with massive amounts of data, given that the major tech firms can essentially swamp you with data intentionally. Do you see any solutions to that challenge?
It's a very good question. It's something that we have dealt with on cases over the years. Sort of what you describe as, and I'm not saying who, but sort of intentional data dumps that we then have to go through. We obviously, it's not appropriate, but to be fair to companies as well, sometimes they're trying to be as inclusive as possible to our records production requests, and that may expand the scope a bit of what they provide. But we also need the tools, and we have them, and we're getting better tools to forensically examine the data so that we can separate out the relevant from the irrelevant more quickly, and using forensics e-discovery tools as opposed to relying on individual bureau competition law officers or paralegals to go through record by record.
Yeah, I would think that technology could play an important role in that. I know that obviously law firms spend a lot on technology to automate some of those processes. Are you able to look at doing the same thing at the Bureau?
Absolutely. And we're doing it. And as part of our digital strategy, we have sort of an e-discovery production working group within the Bureau, always looking for better tools and how to implement them in the most effective manner across our different areas of enforcement, which is an important point. We have, as you know, we have a cartel and deceptive marketing practices division that deals with criminal and civil cases. And so, when you're going through documents in a criminal case, those documents then have to be, if charges are laid, you have to do disclosure, and they need to be properly inventoried and detailed. And so there are different considerations in the criminal sphere in terms of how we might go through records we obtain on a search warrant, for example, and then in civil matters or in merger review. So it very much, we have tools. We're always looking for better tools and looking for the ability to acquire those tools.
Another question for you here from the audience. Will the recently proposed changes tabled as part of the Digital Charter Implementation Act, will they change the Bureau's approach to enforcement related to representations regarding privacy and data collection?
I don't believe so, in the sense that, well, it's a bill right now. So the bill as it stands maintains the Bureau's position as being able to investigate and enforce where necessary false or misleading representations with respect to privacy. That is, to promote your product, you're saying something about privacy, the privacy of your app or whatever that's not accurate or gives a general impression that's false or misleading. We'll still be able to do so, and that's obviously what we did with Facebook, in my view. I think, a positive aspect of that bill is allowing for more enforcement cooperation between the Privacy Commissioner and the Competition Bureau. That's included as an amendment to our act, and consequential amendments for the Privacy Commissioner. So that's positive. That's something that the Privacy Commissioner and myself and other Bureau representatives have talked about as being a difficulty in our sort of parallel investigations in the past. So that's positive.
Right. So would that mean that you could work together, for example, on something like the Facebook Cambridge Analytica issue?
It gives us the ability to share confidential information more easily with safeguards in place, but to share that information when we both have investigations going, which, we're fortunate because in our international work, we can share information with our international partners. Cases, we can share information with domestic law enforcement agencies. This was kind of a particular issue that we're pleased to see the bill includes consideration of.
That's interesting. There's a question here about recent political changes in the U.S. Obviously, this is still a bit of an ongoing situation, but I think we can get it. We have a pretty good sense of where it's heading. Do you think that those changes will help or hurt our competitive horizon?
Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball on that, but what I can tell you is that, assuming things play out the way most people believe they will in the next few months, the senior people in the Democratic Party have placed tremendous emphasis on competition enforcement, resources for competition agencies. Obviously, the House Subcommittee on Antitrust's report, the majority in that report are Democrats. There's a minority of report as well by Republicans in the House on the House Committee. But as I said, even in that report, there was tons of bipartisan support for an increased focus on competition enforcement, perhaps even some stronger rules on mergers in the United States. Rules that, by the way, the merger review rules in the United States are already significantly stronger than the rules in Canada. And they're talking about making them stronger. So, and their sanctions are already stronger, and they're talking about making them stronger. So I would say that, with Democrats in power, we'll see a greater emphasis on competition policy and enforcement in the United States.
We've touched on this a bit before, but in the congressional report, there was some agreement that there had been some missed opportunities to scrutinize some of the acquisitions that happened along the way that allowed big tech to essentially to buy up smaller companies, shut them down. Is that, how can we address that on the Canadian startup scene here?
Well, I think it goes to just the Bureau's ability to consider whether the acquisition is going to result in a substantial lessening or substantial prevention of competition. And a series of acquisitions of small potential competitors could be problematic, and it's we need the ability to look at those transactions and consider this notion of the prevention of competition, which is a big issue around the world in debates about how to modify competition laws to be able to address these issues of prevention and other issues that are somewhat unique to the digital economy, like non-price effects in a free platform world.
Right.
So the issues are certainly challenging. Our team at the Bureau is amazing team that's pivoted from the pandemic, working from home almost instantly, and kept driving ahead on tons of important work. So it's just important for me to take the opportunity to thank them and say how incredible it is for the public interest that we have this amazing team of dedicated public servants who live and breathe the importance of competition for our country. And they are on these issues. The Bureau is a leader in international dialogue on competition policy issues. And so just to go back to your question, I sort of wandered away there a bit, but the acquisition of potential competitors to prevent or kill that competitor, to shut down whatever work they're doing, big issue. We're paying attention to it. We're monitoring as much as we can.
I can imagine that it might get even more complicated as we see a lot of companies in potential financial distress because of the pandemic.
Absolutely, and that's an issue that we've talked about. I've talked about where what's commonly referred to in the competition law world as failing firm acquisitions,
right? And
where it's a competitor buying a competitor that's a failing firm or could be a failing firm. There's sort of a process that the Bureau has for examining that, and we have to do our work as quickly as we can in those situations because the firm may in fact be exiting the market. But what the point we've made on that is the long-term consequences of a competitor acquiring another competitor and thereby resulting in more market concentration are so significant that we can't relax our analytical rigor there. We got to do the work. We got to make sure that it's in fact a failing firm. We got to make sure there weren't better options in terms of the acquirer. And so, we're ready to do that. We've put communications out to the legal community about our willingness to do that. We need the information quickly. Because getting it wrong has significant long-term implications for Canadians, for prices they pay as a result of perhaps a diminishment in competition.
And just quickly before we wrap up, what are in terms of how quickly you are able to respond to merger reviews and things like that? Have your timelines been affected by the pandemic?
I would say for the most part, no. I don't have the statistics handy, but we do keep statistics. We publish the statistics twice a year in terms of the percentage we meet our service standard in. I believe those are continuing at about the same pace historically that they do. For non-complex mergers, we have often almost 100% in terms of meeting our service standard, which is a very short period of time for review. Obviously, sometimes for very, very complex transactions, our review takes a while. Sometimes for very complex international transactions, our review is impacted by reviews all over the world, and the companies in question prioritizing one jurisdiction over another to get the deal done or to try and get it approved. So, but to go back to my point about the team, it's been incredible how we've gone from, certainly with respect to merger reviews, our people are here and in Toronto, but we've gone from teams working together in the building to being dispersed all over the place, but continuing to meet our targets and to do incredible work in the public interest.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm sure I could ask questions for the next hour, but I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. It's been great. And I think I'll just throw it back to Colleen.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate, and what a great conversation. I'm feeling competitive, or at least more knowledgeable about how important competition is for Canadian economic future. Commissioner Boswell, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your insights into Canada's economic recovery. I hope your calls are heard by consumers and business owners and governments across the country. So hopefully they're hearing you and your important message. Christine, thank you for your guidance of today's conversation. We love that you were here with us and your great insights and probing Matthew a little bit further. So thank you. And for all of you that have joined us today, thank you for engaging us online. We hope that perhaps you might join us for our upcoming events. Tomorrow, Thursday, the 26th, we'll host the Honourable Peter Bethlen-Falvey, Ontario's Treasurer Board President and Minister responsible for digital and data transformation. So hopefully he was listening today as well. And on Tuesday, December 1st, we'll host a panel of merger and acquisition experts for discussion on who's doing deals in Canada and what's driving the trends and the horizon for 2021. So also timely for our conversation today. So hopefully you'll join us then. I want to take time to thank Waste Connections of Canada again for sponsoring today's event. And I want to thank our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. Guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.